Thank you for joining me here today. The title of this presentation is an accessibility audit of an online course. My name is Carol Sparks, and I'm an instructional designer at Thompson Rivers University in Kamloops, British Columbia. As sort of a self-identity, I'm older, and with the help of glasses, I'm a sighted person. I used to work at the University of Guelph from 2012 to 2017 and learned about accessibility as we all adapted to the AODA, or the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. When I moved to British Columbia in 2018, there was no accessibility legislation in place. So my experience with how accessibility can improve instructional design and make for a more inclusive environment was appreciated. And yet sometimes seen as unnecessary, perhaps. Now we have the Accessible British Columbia Act, ABCA, in place, and the government organizations are supposed to lead by example. As far as disabilities go, I have essential tremors, so my hands shake, and I'm increasingly aware of the benefits of designing with accessibility in mind, as my thumbs double tap on my phone when I'm trying to type. In this presentation, I'll show you different areas of an online communications course that were reviewed during an accessibility audit. And we'll just stay on. Oh, all this is on the first page there, Rob, sorry. Let me see. The audit was done with lived user experience, and you'll see the results and consider the recommendations. Target audience, instructional designers, faculty, students, anyone creating digital materials. So we'll go to the second slide. The territorial acknowledgement, I would just like to acknowledge that Thompson Rivers University campuses are on the traditional lands of the Kamloops to Secwepemc. That's the Kamloops campus, and the Teklik, which is the Williams Lake campus within Secwepemc, the traditional and unceded territory of the Secwepemc. This is a picture on the left of mountains, trees, and blue sky that I took while walking home one day from work. It's a very beautiful area, and I'm delighted to be working there. Next slide. So the themes, I wanted to make a direct connection to the conference theme, which is looking forward, technology integration and innovation in education. And I'm looking at screen reader access of online courses. So the connection there is probably obvious. The theme of day one is universal design for learning, accessibility and engagement in blended and online delivery. And my focus is on accessibility in particular for screen readers. And I'm learning about screen magnification as well. So, and you know, the title of my presentation is Accessibility Audit of an Online Course. Next slide. So the accessibility audit was done on a first-year communications online course, and the course is titled Professional and Academic Composition. Moodle is the learning management system. We made updates to the course to make it as accessible as we knew how. We looked at tables, in particular schedule and rubrics, which are often in tables, were evaluated. Lists were added or replaced tables. Videos were checked for transcripts, and heading levels were evaluated. Next slide. Last year at CNIE, I presented on making this course accessible and highlighted the open resource my colleague and I, so my colleague Carolyn Tier and I, had created to help others learn. About accessibility, the URL is onestep.truebox.ca, and a screenshot of the first page is showing, just to encourage you to go there, and it should look familiar. Next slide. So the 5 key areas in that resource are headings, fonts and colors, hyperlinks, tables and lists, audio, video, and images. Recently, I had added activities to help engage readers through pre-tests with no answers and post-tests with answers. Question was, what was next? Was there anything more to learn? Well, we know the answer to that, of course. And thanks, Rob, for putting the URL in the chat. Next slide. We needed experts to test the course. We need experts who were people with lived experience, people with low or no vision, people who regularly use screen readers and screen magnifiers. Where would we find these people? How could we organize them to give us feedback? Well, the answer came to me through volunteer work that I do with CNIB. And there is a company called CNIB Frontier Accessibility that could do all this for us. Next slide. This is, as I said, through my volunteer work at CNIB, that I was connected with a person from CNIB Frontier Accessibility. I used to be a CNIB friendly visitor for years in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and I also did this in Montreal, Quebec through the Montreal Association for the Blind. So when I moved to British Columbia, I connected with CNIB again to see if I could do some volunteer work. And of course, COVID had hit, so we were online. My work in community service had overlapping interests. I wanted to learn from those who use screen readers and support these people at the same time by making my courses accessible. This is a screenshot of CNIB Frontier Accessibility website homepage. Notice they have an education services section. Next slide. CNIB Foundation is a nonprofit. The CNIB Frontier Accessibility is a social enterprise that operates like a business, but all the profits go back to support the CNIB Foundation. So a nonprofit would get money donated as opposed to working like a business. So one of the services of the CNIB Frontier Accessibility is the accessibility audit. And they can do a smaller version of that, a scoping audit. They, as far as I know, are based in Ontario, but have a Western branch. And I was connected with a person in Alberta. As legislation, specifically the Accessible British Columbia Act, came into place, they have a greater customer base, I think. When I expressed interest in having a scope audit done, within my department, I was asked to communicate with other TRU departments to ensure that I wasn't, I think, either stepping on toes, that because there's more than me who are interested in accessibility. So it's important to communicate with others who are interested and make sure we're going in an agreeable direction by doing this. So everyone I talked to was in favor and curious about the results. My open learning department agreed to fund the scoping audit, and were interested to see what we would learn. Part of me thought, what could we learn? Could we learn anything new? We had done the best that we could. So next slide. So a little bit about the audit process. They tested accessibility of the course for, I think you pronounce that, WCAG compliance. And it stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So they screen captured while conducting the audit of the course. And we gave them a copy of the course, so they weren't in anything that students were in. We gave them a development version of the course. They explained how the tools were being used and what tools they were using. So, for example, they might be saying, okay, we press tab or down arrow to go to the next level, or shift down arrow to go in reverse. So I learned a few things about the tools. Then they also provided a summary of the findings and recommendations in text format, which was very helpful. I did use a tool to get an exact transcript, but that was not as helpful as I thought it would be. And so I understood why they didn't actually do that, because you have the screen reader talking as well as the person. And yeah. Anyway, next slide. So some of the audit tools, just to situate things, there were different screen readers available. They can take some getting used to if you're trying to do them yourself. So it was a relief for me to watch the video where the experienced user explained what keystrokes were being used while the screen was being recorded. They used the operating system Windows 11 because they said that's what most students are using. They used 2 screen readers, NVDA, which stands for Non-Visual Desktop Access, which is a free downloadable screen reader for Microsoft Windows. And the other one was Microsoft Narrator that's built into Windows 11. And they referred to that as very basic narrator screen reader. So if it worked in that one, it should work for any of the more advanced screen readers. And he also switched between browsers. So for Chrome and Firefox. So if something didn't work in one, wanted to see if it was the screen reader issue or if it was the browser issue. So it really gave us some good insights. Next slide. So areas of feedback that we did receive were alt text, headings and heading navigation, color and contrast, tables and lists, meaningful sequence, practice quiz, radio buttons, video accessibility, and apparently captions are not optional. So some aspects were seen to be issues that had to do with Moodle itself, but some could be easily resolved. It was helpful to see what we were doing right and what we could do to improve. The audit made me more aware of the needs of those who use screen magnifiers as well as screen readers. I think I was more focused on screen readers, and this helped to enlighten me on a few things. So we definitely learned some lessons. It's been a worthwhile process. Next slide. So with alt text, just in case people are not familiar with screen readers, alt text is the text that a screen reader reads out loud when it encounters an image. If you don't have anything added there, then it will default to the usually unhelpful file name, such as image1233.jpg, and that could be the easiest of them. And so in one of the pages, I had image alt text that said black twist pen and planner. So my question to you is, what image do you see or imagine when you hear that without even seeing the image? Those 2 items are in the image, but there's no context on their use. So I was surprised to get feedback on this. So if everybody has an idea, black twist pen and planner. So here's the image. Oh, next slide. And the suggested alt text was black twist pen resting on an open planner. And it's such a small, subtle change, but yet it does help. The module that this image is used is the first one, Introduction to Professional and Academic Writing. Is this the image that you saw? The suggested alt text of black twist pen resting on an open planner does give a sense of context that you've been writing and the pen is resting on the open planner while perhaps you stop to take a sip of tea or coffee or wine or whatever. The image is to help set the tone for the first module and provide a resting place for the learner's eyes before reading the overview of the module. Some would question whether this is a decorative image, and so the alt text, if you did think it was that, would be an empty quote, empty set of quotes. So the screen reader would just ignore it. I would say if the image is of value to the sighted user, then it may be of value to the person using a screen reader as well. If it is of no value to the sighted user, then it should be deleted. If the image has an alt text, it should also have a caption as well as the copyright. And I did a screenshot there, so you're not seeing that. Next slide. So also within alt text, some things that I hadn't considered and really didn't have input into just because I hadn't thought of it. So it's the second issue with alt text is icons used as bullets. Would you include alt text for this kind of an image bullet? We did, and just added assignment icon to say what it was. And we were informed that typically it's not recommended to describe icons on a page if they are effectively just fancy bullets with headings or text next to them that would say what you would put in an alt text. So they suggested just using it as a decorative image with empty string as your alt text. They did say that if you have an image that links to another destination, so it's basically acts as a hyperlink, then you would want an alt text to describe where it would take the user. One other case is where you may have an icon that gives symbolic information not provided in the text, such as a label to label a link to a PDF document as PDF. Then the icon alt text would be PDF document. So yeah, learning little, you don't know what you don't know. Next slide. The second area of learning was the headings and heading navigation. So screen readers navigate, or people who use screen readers navigate by the heading styles. Heading 1 should be at the top and be the only heading 1 on the page. There can be multiple heading 2s, and under the heading 2 can be multiple heading 3s and so on. But you really shouldn't skip levels. It can be tempting because you think this is the right size text that I want, but don't do it. It's confusing for the screen reader who's looking for the next level underneath. The other thing to keep in mind is using bold text. So to the sighted user, it looks like a heading, but to the person using a screen reader, it doesn't act like a heading. And so the other element is the out of order headings. Oh yes, and this had to do with a footer on a learning management system page. And that should be a heading 2 so that you can navigate to it like any of the main headings. Ours was not a heading 2, and so that was helpful information. I never even thought about what heading level the footer would be in. And also the right sidebar should also be a heading 2. So we have a sidebar menu that comes out if you hover over it. So in order to go to it, it should be a heading 2. Next slide. Headings out of order. So this is just an example that shows that we had a note there that we made heading 5 that was dropping down from a heading 2, and the navigation bar on the right was also a heading 5. So I think perhaps somebody used it because it was fitting the right look of the wording that we had put in the templates. Next slide. Use of color and contrast. Oh, number 3. There we go. So we knew about this and also thought about, but didn't think about non-text contrast. There's a video example. I'll get to these. Inline text, so links where you don't use an underline, something to consider for people with low vision, and menu items marked to show you where you are. So examples are on the following slide. As you can see here, the dark background, thank you, next slide. The background, the black text in the video almost disappears. And yeah, on the screen, when I saw it, it looked fine. But of course, this is a smaller screenshot. But also they did test it for the color ratio. So one might think it doesn't matter because there's a transcript provided. However, for the low vision user or even the sighted user, it makes it unnecessarily difficult to see. Like the text on the right, you can see that while white text would have made for better contrast. And sighted users, we don't realize the conditions under which our materials may be viewed. So we need a 3-to-1 ratio of contrast. Next slide. And I do see we've got 6 minutes left, if no questions. So, so another area, oh yes, so the inline text, this is just an example that shows hyperlink that shows in blue to the sighted user on the top. And in the second example, it shows it with an underline. So there's a problem with the inline links, those in the inside paragraph text, where the only visible indication that they are links is a change in text color. People with low vision, whether with contrast issues or color blindness, need to be able to discern what is a link, and sometimes color will not work for them. There is nothing wrong with using color, but there needs to be some other signifier. And traditionally in HTML, the link is underlined and is recommended to be used in this case. I had never thought of that. So the learning continues. Oh yes, nested lists, they said, consider cognitive load, because if it's hard, this one only has one item under the nested list. But if you had multiple, it's hard to remember what the initial list was, the heading of it. So they say try to create lists without nesting them. Try to write them as though they're not nested. Next slide. So non-text contrast, just wanted to show here. The auditor was really only looking at WCAG 2.0 level A and AA, but he did notice an issue with non-text contrast that would impact level 2.1. So here you can see on the left, the black, so this is to tell person where the focus is. So you can see on the left-hand side, the mark is done, has a very clear black line around it, but the one on the right has a pale blue when it goes up to book. And apparently the pale blue is not sufficient contrast ratio. So that's just something we can update. Next slide. Oh, and this is just an example. You can see at the very top, the word sections is in yellow highlighting. So that's just another example of this is where you've gotten focus. Next slide. Is number 4, tables and lists. Oh yes, I had some concerns about the tables because they had some empty cells, and a number of years ago I learned that empty cells were not good for screen readers, but apparently they're updated now so that it will just say empty. Yes. But so in the next slide, if you would, Rob, it will give an example of the table that I was concerned about because it was to be used as an activity to fill in the blanks, basically, fill in the table as an activity. So it said with a header row and that the table for screen reader was fine. That wouldn't be the problem. The problem would be for those who would use large screen magnification. So if you go to the next slide, I give you an example of one of the cells. And so he said, thank you for putting things into lists, because when people use screen magnifiers, you get to a large magnification, it's difficult to see where the column is or the row or where you are. So lists will work much better. Next slide. Meaningful sequence. This was just an example we weren't sure if we get to fix this one in Moodle, but the option to mark this item as done before the heading that told you what the item was. So it was not in proper sequence. So that's something, as a sighted user, you don't even notice which way your eyes go, or it doesn't matter. But if you tab and you get mark as done, but you don't even know what the section is. All right, next slide. And this is the practice quiz. And the examples there in the blue section. The radio buttons were primarily used in quizzes, and these have a problem. The real label for the buttons and what they do is not attached to the buttons. When a screen reader user tabs onto the buttons, they need to hear the label that describes the use of the buttons. In this case, the question. So in the video, the example is pre-writing is, but this is not the label that is attached to the radio button. It's select one. So all the screen reader user hears is select one. And the recommended fix would be to remove the first label text and modify select one to say pre-writing is select one, and then it would give the options for each of these. And that would also take out the select one as the last thing that they hear before they get to these different options. They had also included what the success criterion numbers were for these in WCAG. Next slide, and I'm on the second last slide. So thank you for your patience. The video accessibility, there were 3 points that surround the video on the website. The color contrast of the text in the video, which I had mentioned before. So when you have text in the video, the same color contrast rules apply. So yeah, black on a brown background is not good. And it also fades in and fades out. So it wasn't helpful there. We didn't have captions. We thought, well, if we had transcripts, then that was fine. It says, unfortunately, transcripts are optional in WCAG, but closed captions are not. In reality, both are needed, and it's a good thing that transcripts have been provided, but we also need to caption the video. So that's a new one for us to start doing. And this was locally produced, so it wasn't a third-party video. And accessibility, the default video player in browsers. He says the problem with relying on the video element is that the default controls are not always, if ever, properly accessible. You cannot rely on the media players in browsers to be accessible. In the case of this audit, it happened to be on Chrome in Windows 11, and that left us with a broken video speed button in the controls. Other browsers, other platforms, different issues. Recommendation is to use either specifically designed accessible players such as those from Accessibility Oz or AbleDocs, or simply to use YouTube, and recommends YouTube as it is the video player that most users are most used to. It may not be great, but familiarity helps, and their controls are available in multiple languages simply by adding a get parameter to your URL. So last slide is just to say in summary, we learned more than I expected, which I'm delighted about. And I also have a better sense of confidence, I think, in trying out NVDA and other screen reader applications. So thank you. I used up all my time and perhaps a minute of someone else's.